So we got some pretty shocking news today, guys. Sony is apparently not attending E3 2019 in any capacity. No press conference, no booth at all, so no games there beyond whatever third parties decide to show themselves. Sony is effectively leaving E3, at least in 2019. So, once again, Sony is copying Nintendo's lead, obviously.
Except Nintendo actually has a presence, so...
No, but I mean, that's a joke. Everyone is saying Nintendo left E3 years ago, when they never actually did. They just stopped hosting a live press conference. Sony is taking it to the next level, though, completely leaving next year entirely. And I thought it'd be fun for us just to discuss this, because even though it doesn't involve Nintendo directly, it's pretty big news regardless. Particularly with the fact that Sony's booth has historically been right next to Nintendo's. So I have a quick statement I want to read here from Game Informer that's direct from Sony itself. Here's what they have to say about this. As the industry evolves, Sony Interactive Entertainment continues to look for inventive opportunities to engage the community. PlayStation fans mean the world to us, and we always want to innovate, think different, and experiment with new ways to delight gamers. As a result, we have decided not to participate in E3 in 2019. We are exploring new and familiar ways to engage our community in 2019, and we can't wait to share our plans with you. In addition, they also state that we will not activate or hold a press conference around E3. So yeah, they just drive the point home. They're not attending E3 really in any capacity. So I guess let's start off with your guys' raw reactions to this. What did you think when you first heard this news?
It's shocking. Like, Sony's one of the big three, so it's crazy for them to not have a conference. But they also didn't do PSX this year, so it's like it kind of feels like is PS4 coming to the end of its legs, and they're just not showing games for it. Because this year's E3 was weird too. If you guys remember, they had it in a tent, and they basically had like 4 demos for the...
Yeah.
Oh, you guys were there, weren't you?
We were there, yeah.
Yeah, and they had like 4 demos for Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us, Spider-Man. I can't remember the other one. It wasn't a very memorable conference, to be honest. And it was just very weird. Like they set up in one tent, and then they moved to another stage, and no one really knew what was going on. So, I guess it's kind of been coming. Sony have been like repositioning their E3 stance for a while now. I just didn't think they would like flat out leave E3 though.
Yeah, me neither. It feels kind of like the end of an era. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I've now lost half of my reason to care about E3 next year because I'm really not much of an Xbox fan. So, I don't personally follow a lot of Xbox brands and series, but PlayStation I do. I'm a big PlayStation fan. But as you kind of suggested, John, it feels like the writing's kind of been on the wall. Their E3 presence this year was really uneven and just kind of strange. Definitely different from what they've normally done, and it felt like they weren't quite sure themselves what they wanted to do. And yeah, it kind of feels like the writing's been on the wall. They canceled PSX too, so this tells me 2 things. A, that PS5 is on the horizon, and B, that whether or not the PS4 is ending the end of its life cycle, it does feel like the software momentum has really kind of slowed for the PS4, and that there's really not a whole lot to look forward to right now. There's some stuff like Ghost of Tsushima and Days Gone and things like that, but their entire E3 presence this year was mainly anchored around Spider-Man, and now that that's out, it doesn't feel like they have a whole lot to talk about, so I'm honestly not that surprised.
So wait, real quick, when you say PS5 is on the horizon, which yeah, obviously it is, you don't mean necessarily in the immediate future though, right?
Sorry, no, I don't think it's going to be out next year or anything.
Right.
It signals to me that they're kind of starting to change gears and change, pivot and change tactics and really look forward to the future, and it seems like that future is not in PS4 software, given what we know of what's coming right now.
Yeah, it is just odd to think about it, because in some ways it makes sense. E3 is becoming less and less important over time. It's, with Nintendo has proven you can hype up games throughout the year with these smaller directs, and people will cluster around them, be really concerned about them, and they'll blow up. Nintendo has proven that time and time again. So maybe Sony's looking at this and like thinking, maybe we don't have to spend as much money. Heck, maybe we can spend even less money than Nintendo and not go to E3 at all, and just save on those resources or whatever we might do. But even you guys were talking about just the press conference itself. Their booth was unexciting. Like I actually took a chance to go through it this past E3, and there really wasn't much to play. There was about the usual stuff that you'd see maybe a couple other places, but as far as the big games, they weren't really there. They only had these places where you could watch the trailers again, and they've done that in the past, but usually it's peppered with other games to look forward to and play, and it felt underwhelming to go through there. And like I went through there, it was basically like, huh, that's it, and moved on.
Yeah.
I think it was E3 2015 when where Sony announced The Last Guardian, Shenmue 3, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and out of all those games, The Last Guardian was the only one to release. I was still waiting on those other two. It kind of feels like they announced a lot of games in advance, and maybe they were pressured to because of the hype and expectations of E3. And E3 is kind of a weird and dated concept now, that you must announce all your games in this one day in the middle of the year. Because games don't always come out around the middle of the year. Sometimes they come out in May, sometimes they come out in March. And I guess it's kind of an odd concept to just announce them all just in that one day. And Nintendo have taken it upon themselves to just sort of announce them whenever they want to, with Directs. But even with Nintendo though, E3 Directs have a bit more of an expectation behind them. And I think you just lose something when you take away E3. I mean, Directs are always exciting, but we're always just a bit more pumped for that E3 Direct. And it's disappointing, I think, to hear this news.
I kind of see what you mean. I mean, E3 has been an institution. Like, as long as we've been playing games, we've been reading about E3 for the most part. It's been around for over 20 years now. It's basically Christmas Day for gamers. However, I'm looking at my own stats right here for our own traffic throughout the year. And while E3 was the most traffic day for us, there are multiple other days that are just behind it, like not too far behind. And while I don't think our stats are the end-all be-all of how meaningful E3 is in this day and age, I do think it kind of suggests the idea that E3, as you guys also touched on, it has been kind of diminishing in importance. You don't need it so much these days as you did before, where I mean, it's actually kind of shocking in a way it's taken this long for this idea to maybe catch on, because with the internet becoming such a thing, you don't have to gather everyone in one place now to distribute news. In order for it to get out there, you can just put out a press release or show a trailer, and it'll instantly reach, effectively millions of people, and it'll be picked up by outlets all around the world. So I think now E3 just kind of, it's like time is finally just kind of maybe catching up with E3, because even over the past few years, even though Nintendo itself hasn't loved the show, they've been taking their own steps in their own ways, where they stopped hosting live conferences. And I think it was E3 2015 where they only had a single game at the show, being Zelda Breath of the Wild. So I think this might be the case with time maybe just catching up with E3. What's especially interesting is this isn't the first time E3's dealt with something of this nature. Like back in 10 years ago, it was held in like an airplane hangar, as I recall.
Oh, God.
And it was barely even what we think of E3 then. And that was the case for a couple of years, actually. So yeah, I think this may be another time of change for it, perhaps, where this is just a start of another transformation. Or maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe Sony will come back in 2020 when they actually have something to show. Yeah,
it's hard to say whether it's because they just don't have anything to show this year, or if it's indicative of a wider trend. I mean, I do remember, and you brought up two examples, Andre, where Nintendo, first when they stopped doing live conferences, and then when they only brought one game to the show, being Breath of the Wild. The initial reaction for both of those was, oh my god, what are they doing? Is it the end? This is such a negative thing. It was crazy. But then I think looking back with the benefit of hindsight, we can say that Nintendo made the right calls there. And not only that, but hosting and building these live conferences is immensely expensive.
Right.
And when you consider the fact that there are other ways to reach your audience, as Nintendo has proven with the Nintendo Directs, I can see why Sony might not want to spend that money anymore, because what's really the point? They can deliver information straight to their audience if they want, and given that Sony loves to copy Nintendo sometimes, I would not be surprised to hear them talking about, hey, we've designed this innovative new way to reach directly to our PlayStation fan base. They're called PlayStation Directs. Isn't that cool? I can totally see that happening.
Uh-huh.
I mean, even the demo aspect, because E3 used to be the way to get a bunch of demos into the hands of press, so you can get an idea and get people excited about your game coming out by having footage or previews or whatever have you. But the last 2 years, not like less than a month after E3, I typically get an invite from Nintendo to go up and play the same set of games without having to wait in the lines. So I can totally see Sony just going to the same route where hey, we're having a preview. Invite a bunch of media, set something up in New York, LA, Seattle, San Francisco, wherever. Bring a bunch of journalists in there, try out the lineup of games. Same effect, heck of a lot cheaper. And don't have to do all this other stuff along with it. So as a cost-cutting measure, this isn't a bad idea on Sony's part.
Right, and they totally could do an E3 show. I mean, they have the material for it. They could have Dreams, they could have Ghost of Tsushima, they could have Call of Duty and Destiny and all these other third-party games. There's nothing holding them back. And just because there aren't new reveals doesn't mean they can't have another E3 show, because we've had bad E3 shows in the past. So I guess the question is a mediocre E3 show worse than just having no E3 show at all? Like, which one do you think is worse?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question Sony's kind of answering right now, and I think the answer is clearly from their perspective, having no show is better than a mediocre show. I guess they just, I think they want to deliver the coverage that they want on their own, more on their own terms, rather than having it stacked immediately against the competition, perhaps.
Yeah.
And who knows? And who knows what Microsoft and Nintendo might be bringing next year?
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to compare last year to this year, because I think some people would tell you that this year's Sony E3 presence was decidedly mediocre. Not that Spider-Man isn't great, but it really was just Spider-Man, as well as a few really limited looks at other upcoming games like Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima, but it wasn't up to their usual standard of E3 presences. So I wonder if they got that message too, and they're like, well, all this money we spent on this, maybe it's not worth having another show like that. And Derek, you brought up a good point about how Nintendo will often invite us to go play the same games they had at E3 in a private media appointment just with no lines. And I would extend that not just for media, but PAX. PAX has now become the de facto E3 for gamers, for non-media, and oftentimes now PAX has the same exact lineup that we get to play at E3 for the public. And that's another way they can spend their money on PAX and spend their money on reaching out directly to their audience and not worry about E3. So in that sense, I kind of get it.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, though, because E3 just recently opened their doors to the public, and now this is, a major reason for people not to go next year.
It's pretty expensive, from what I understand, still to go to E3, though, if you're just going as a member of the public.
Yeah, but people are willing to pay it, apparently. I think they've sold out. I think they've had no problem selling out, as far as I know.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess this means all those people who attended to go to Sony's conference will now be in other booths now. So now the Nintendo booth's going to have more people in
Even
there.
more lines. Great.
Yeah. It makes me wonder what the other companies will do. Like, will EA still have a show? Will Ubisoft and all the others, like smaller shows that we get leading up to the big three? And who's taking over Sony's spot at E3? Like, would Microsoft move in? Because I believe last year Microsoft was in a tent outside of E3. I don't even think they were that big of a part, even in the usual halls, at least as far as I can remember. But I'm not positive on that one either. So E3 is definitely going through some changes.
Mm-hmm. I hope no one takes their stage schedule though, because Sony always have their press conferences in the UK at 2 a.m. and every year I stay up and watch their conference, and it's so tiring.
They're always so long too.
Yeah,
right. And they're the only one who do it. Like Microsoft have like a nice like an 8 a.m. show, like an 8 p.m. show or something like that. Nintendo's always in the middle of the day, and then Sony's like, no, we're going to make you stay up until the middle hours. So it's great for America, but for European times, Sony's show has always been disastrous. I do wonder how that reflects on their ratings compared to other publishers.
That's something I'm not sure of, but yeah. It's a matter of... And the other thing, as we mentioned before, is just the competition. Why would you try to promote your games at the same time as everybody else? When, again, Nintendo has shown, promote it anytime during the year and get way more attention. Nobody else is really competing with you at that time.
You're right, but Nintendo also is they're still at E3.
True.
Maybe not in the exact same capacity they have been before, but they still showed off their biggest Switch game. I mean, they gave their entire booth to their biggest Switch game at the time, or Wii U game, I should say, being Breath of the Wild. So Sony is really taking it to a greater extreme. I guess really the question is just if this means anything or not. Like if they don't come back in 2020, then absolutely, this is a huge deal. If they are back in 2020, then it's like nothing happened. Like nothing really changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that they're taking this year off to really, rally the troops and prepare for the big media blitz of the PS5 reveal, which I think would be happening in 2020 most likely. Certainly not next year, I don't think. And perhaps that's what's going on. Maybe they're just taking a year off to, they're going to speak directly to their fans in various ways throughout the year about their upcoming games like Ghost of Tsushima and things like that. And then next year they'll come back with a major E3 presence to, announce the PS5. Who knows? But I agree with you, Andre. It really is going to be the key here is whether it's a trend. If this is a one-time thing, it might not mean a whole lot. But if it's a trend, then yeah, it means something.
I think if Microsoft announced their next-gen console at this E3, that's going to look really bad on Sony. Like, if Microsoft have a really good show showing their new system and all these new games, and Sony's not even there, that's just going to reflect really badly.
It might. I mean, probably, but it might reflect badly if Sony were there and had nothing to compete with it. So,
yeah,
that's true.
It might be a lose-lose situation, except in this case, one losing situation saves them a lot of money. So, how much do we ourselves care about this? I know Ash already touched on the fact that he's disappointed with Sony not being there. But are you disappointed more with the fact that they're not at the show, or maybe that means there's not much for them to show? I guess, where's your disappointment coming from here, Ash?
I think a little bit of both. It felt like the PS4 had such amazing software momentum for a few years there, and it just feels like in the past past year or so, that has kind of come to a halt. And I'm a PlayStation fan, and I like it when there's stuff to be excited about coming up on PS4 and other PlayStation systems, and it just doesn't feel like they have a whole lot to be excited about right now. The other side of that is it's purely personal and selfish, and as as just an attendee when I'm there as a fan too. Some of the hypest moments of E3 have been during PlayStation conferences, and so purely selfishly, I'm just going to miss that hype. I'm not saying it's indicative of Sony's imminent downfall or anything like that, but just personally, we go both as journalists and as fans. And as a fan, God, some of those moments during PlayStation E3 conferences were incredible, so full of hype, and I'm gonna miss that.
I definitely see where you're coming from there. It's just a lot of fun to see some of these big announcements. But the funny thing is, I never really had the time to go to Sony's booth, and a lot of times when I did go to Sony's booth, the stuff I wanted to check out was never really there or just too long of a line. So I never really got to experience a lot of stuff at Sony. So while it sucks on a personal level, I think on a professional level, I don't think it matters that much.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk, I guess if you want to talk about like selfish reasons for whether we're happy or upset about this, as a fan, I would be disappointed. I think as John hit on earlier, it was fun looking forward to E3, seeing what all the announcements would be for every for every console, even if you didn't have the competitor systems, if you want to call them that. If you're a Nintendo fanboy or whatever, like it's fun just to see what's going on in the gaming landscape and seeing like what a game every competitor is bringing. On the other hand, as one who's been working in the industry for over 10 years now, I'm totally okay with E3 just going away. I much prefer covering the show, or I much prefer covering games, like covering directs, for instance, from home, or it just makes it easier for coverage purposes, not having to go to LA, especially. No offense, Ash. So I don't mind it in that sense. I don't mind avoiding the lines. I will miss meeting the fans, even though we get that at PAX and other events as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, when it comes to coverage, like E3 is a very stressful time, and I'm okay with that aspect. As a fan, though, I would be disappointed if this is the start of a greater trend, because if Sony's dropping out for good, and then Microsoft and Nintendo do follow within the next few years, that's effectively the end of E3. I don't see how E3 could survive on third-party support alone after this point.
Yeah, agreed. And I also think part of Sony's direction is also VR, and VR does not demo well on a stage. Like, there has never been a good VR demo. And maybe that's another reason. Like, maybe PS5 doubles down on VR, and you can't really sell that on a stage. And I don't think Sony have really figured out how you sell VR games, because whenever they do a demo, it always goes either really awkwardly, or it's either like a sign to zone out. Like when they go, this is our PSVR segment, you can just go, okay, I don't need to listen to this. And I think they just haven't really nailed that. So maybe having their own events can actually segment that and make it more interesting. But yeah, E3 has not been nice to VR, and I think that's kind of a good thing for Sony to get away from.
That's a good point. And also, Derek kind of touched on this earlier, but the writing has been on the wall, and I feel like this has kind of been built up to. Like, if you look at the trends over the past couple of years, it's not as surprising, because I remember when the PlayStation booths, and Derek, this is what you touched on, when they used to be so much better. There would literally be a treasure trove of indie games I'd never heard of. Really, really, really cool, innovative stuff that I would just go up and down every road discovering cool new PlayStation games coming out, and then that stopped. Like, there was a specific, I think it was 2 years ago, where all the indie presence was wiped away from the booth, and it became all about a scant few AAA mainstream games, and that's fine too, but their focus switched so much from having all these games to focusing on just a few, and in that sense, it kind of feels like they've been slowly kind of peeling the Band-Aid off and building up to this, okay, well, instead of focusing on just a few, now we're not going to be there at all. So we'll have to see what they're going to do instead, because they still obviously want to speak to their audience and hype people up. But, it does feel like they've, in a way, that they've been building up to this.
And, I suppose there's also games like Final Fantasy VII. We've gone through the entirety of the PS4's life cycle, and that game's not going to come out on PS4, let's face that.
It's not going to come out on PS5 either.
It's amazing we're getting Kingdom Hearts 3 on PS4.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe the lack of E3 is actually going to stop those kind of announcements from happening. I mean, I doubt it, but maybe it will.
Yeah, that's kind of a good point too. Like, there's a lot of pressure, of course, to have a good show at E3, and that oftentimes involves making announcements too early, like the Final Fantasy VII remake, clearly. Or showing off games or demos that aren't either A, complete, or B, not necessarily representative of the final game. I can't think of any super recent examples, so maybe it's not even a point too much worth considering, but I am reminded of like the Halo 2 demo back in the day, which ended up almost nothing like the final game. Like, there were aspects of the final game in there, but the actual area they showed off of didn't end up in the final retail build at all. So, I think this may just make sense for Sony to announce these games again on their own schedule, separate from the yearly E3 thing. I think that makes sense for everyone in a way, and we've seen again Nintendo already take this step to some degree. Again, it just brings us back to the question of whether this is going to be the case moving forward, or if it's just kind of like an anomaly right now.
Yeah, 2020 E3 will be the really interesting one.
I say it'll be weird to announce it outside of E3, but then I remember that's happened multiple times before. Most recently with the Switch, but wasn't even the Xbox 360 announced on MTV or something? So, clearly, you don't have to have E3 to announce your new console.
That's true. Even PS4 Pro was announced at its own event. They do this quite often, actually. And Xbox have just started Inside Xbox, where it's basically Nintendo Directs, but on a lower key. But then again, Xbox have Inside Xbox, Nintendo have Nintendo Direct, but they still do E3.
Right.
It's an odd place to be in. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it, to be honest. I'm still disappointed, I think. It's just kind of sinking in at the moment.
Yeah.
And I will say, a couple of years, or, a few years after Nintendo stopped doing live conferences, I don't miss them as much as I thought I would. At the time, I was gutted. I was like, oh my god, I look forward to these conferences every year. This is so sad. But I enjoy the E3 Directs. There's still a lot of, as I think it was you, Andre, who was touching on this earlier, there's still a lot of hype behind the E3 Directs, even more than regular Directs, and that kind of fills that void for me that was left by Nintendo stopping doing live conferences. And I may be saying what I'm saying now about how disappointed I am and this just sucks, but if this is it and they don't do any more live conferences and don't do E3, maybe it won't be as disappointing as I thought it would be a few years down the line. Although I will say it is strange that they're taking it to a new level and not only nixing the press conference, but also nixing any show floor presence at all. That's the part of this that really gets me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose Nintendo still have an E3 presence, that's why they have a show floor. Because they still have a Direct where they announce all these games. Whereas if Sony had a show floor presence, it would just be a random assortment of games that have no relevance to E3.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
right.
Pretty much.
Getting back to the hype angle real quick, because Ash is talking about it, maybe if E3 were to go away, it wouldn't be the worst for that reason. Because everyone always gets their expectations up to ridiculous degrees for the show. And has there ever been a year where a large amount of people weren't disappointed by any of the major threes showings? With few exceptions, like the one year Sony announced Final Fantasy VII Remake, Shenmue 3, and I forget what else, both of which aren't out yet, by the way. It seems like it's almost impossible to live up to that hype, and it's kind of feeds into the toxicity that we've seen in the industry, especially recently. And I wonder if stepping away from that may not be the worst thing. Even though people get hyped for Nintendo Directs as well, that's a much smaller cycle. You only have a couple days or so to get wrapped up in that, as opposed to months of build up to E3.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially when you bring up the toxicity element, because the industry is nothing if not toxic right now, and kind of bowing out of the E3 scene and not building up these impossible expectations only to inevitably let them down to some degree might be better for everyone in general, not just Sony, but also for their audience.
And yeah, sometimes it's like, if you have a bad E3 one year, it's just like, well, guess we're going to wait for next year then. And it's like you just have to wait an entire year to see another good showing of video game announcements. It's an odd concept that feels very dated today, especially when games have shorter announcement to release schedules. And Nintendo kind of showcased that too. Like they announce games in directs that release like the following month.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's that quickly.
Or
I
even,
guess that's just kind of the feature.
Or even look at Smash Brothers. How we found out about it, like when it launches, we'll have known about the game for less than a year, substantially, several months less than a year. So,
I guess my final thought would be, the only concerning part of this for me, again, the E3 part of it makes sense to a degree, but I do think it's a little suspicious that it comes on the heels of them also canceling PSX, because for all intents and purposes, the PlayStation Experience is their version of a Nintendo Direct, but it's a live show. Now, of course, that's way more expensive to put on, and I can see why they might not want to do that. But it is a little suspicious that this comes after they've already canceled their own show that's catered to their own audience. So that, to me, raises a couple of red flags. But at the same time, it is only, this is just only happening now. It hasn't become a trend yet. But, 2 shows being canceled for PlayStation is a bit strange. That's what I'll say about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their lineup is still strong. Like Ghost of Tsushima and Last of Us Part 2 and Days Gone, which I'm not too excited for Days Gone, but the other two,
Sony is.
I think, I think it's still a decent lineup and there isn't much to be worried about. And I'm sure they still will announce games in 2019, but there is a bit of uncertainty going on there. And maybe if we knew the dates for these games, because we have no idea when Dreams is coming out, or Ghost of Tsushima, or The Last of Us. And part of me even thinks The Last of Us won't come out until the PS5, as in like a cross-gen title. And yeah, that is kind of concerning if that's all we have, and the PS5 is 2020. So maybe they should have actually been a bit more transparent about what's actually going on with their 2019 schedule. Because so far they've just told us that they're not going to say as much. Well, I mean, not necessarily that, but they've told us they're not going to have E3, which, that is inherently less. So yeah, it's like we're not really sure what's going on, and it feels like maybe they're not sure what's going on. A little bit of a worrying time, I think.
Perhaps.
One might even say Sony's E3 days are gone.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry, I had to. I've been sitting on that one.
I'm so tempted to just shut it down right now.
No, as far as Sony, like, it is a little odd. It definitely feels like a wind down to get ready for the PlayStation 5. That's not to say the lineup isn't bad, even beyond the stuff that you guys have been mentioning. In January, we have freaking Resident Evil 2 and Kingdom Hearts 3. Like, there's some big games still coming for this system. So it's not like we're going to be looking at a wasteland of titles like we were for the Wii U's final year. Like, we're still going to have good games and stuff to play. And, completely off topic, John, but it just occurred to me that if Sony does go for the VR angle with the PlayStation 5, like they lean really hard into that, it's the perfect time to. PlayStation 5, PlayStation VR, you give it the Roman numeral and there you go.
Oh man, it's true.
That is perfect.
Yeah.
It's working pretty well. There are 2 more points I want to bring up real quick that occurred to me. One is the fact, I think with Sony potentially, with Sony seeing out 2019 and maybe in the future, or especially in the future if they do, that inherently lowers the value of E3 for everyone else. I think that's less eyes on the show in general, and I think that actually makes it less of a draw for other companies and fans, which I think is interesting. So if Sony is leaving permanently, this could mark the end, the beginning of the end for E3. And second to that is, I think the timing of this is interesting. I've seen a lot of people ask, why did they announce this already? As if it would have mattered when they announced it. I mean, did you want to be disappointed later instead of now?
Yeah.
And I think that's why. I think it makes sense. Yeah, get out there as early as you can. Why build up hype for something that's not going to happen? I think announcing it sooner rather than later is the right idea. It's probably the best possible idea, and just get it out of the way. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid.
it gets people used to the idea of when E3 does come around, they aren't there. It's exactly why Nintendo announced the Wii's name before E3. They didn't want that to be the only thing people talked about, so they got the name out of the way right away.
So what basically what this means is by November 16th of next year, if Sony hasn't announced that they won't be at E3, that means they will be.
Oh god.
And another example of that actually is Microsoft cancelled Scalebound like 3 days before the Nintendo Switch presentation, like the actual announcement of the Switch, and that was clearly to like mask all the negativity of that. And yeah, people forget in time, people forgive in time, so announcing it now is definitely the right decision.
Oh yeah, that's kind of like putting out a bad press release on Friday when no one's working and writing news, so so people forget about it by the time Monday rolls around. Yeah. All right, well I think that brings us to the end of our discussion about Sony not attending E3 2019. It's hard to say what exactly it means right now, if anything, but that question will be answered in time. So with that, thanks for watching. Of course, stay tuned to GameXplain for lots more about E3 2019 once we get to it, which thankfully is still a few months away, thank God, and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later.